All right, so let's begin our journey into Sefirat Omer. So welcome back. And this is going to be a really fun series because we'll cover a lot of different topics because we have 5 weeks together getting ready for Shavuot, but we're in the middle of the journey already. So this is not just about preparation, but it's about right now, the time period that we're in. Sefirat Omer, Lag BaOmer is coming up every day, literally. I mean, now Sefirat Omer is about making every single day count. So every single day is powerful. So we want to learn all about these themes. What is Sefirat Omer about? What is Lag BaOmer about? The book of Ruth, as we get closer to Shavuot, the holiday of Shavuot itself, all the different aspects of Shavuot, being the festival of the harvest, the day the Jewish people got the Torah, the 50th day of counting, all of the things. So let's begin today and let's speak a little bit about what Sefirat Omer is all about. And you saw in the handouts, we'll discuss a little bit of the Kabbalistic concept of the Sefirot as we understand what each week represents. So the word Omer itself is a measurement, specifically a measurement of barley. On the second day of Pesach, during temple times, there would be a sacrifice brought in the temple, and it was an unusual sacrifice, but it was brought with an omer, this measurement of barley. And that would symbolize the beginning of a process, of an unfolding process, which would begin on Pesach and would culminate 50 days later on Shavuot. And we know in Judaism that time is packed with possibilities, packed with energy, and packed with potential. Not all times are created equal. And there are certain segments of time during the year when just there is an energy flow of possibility into the world, a time where we're supposed to be more intentional. All times are good times for growth, but there are certain times when the gates are open just a little bit wider. And that's what Sefirat Omer is all about, is trying to tap into that. The commentaries point out that the sacrifice of the Omer was brought with barley. On Shavuot, there was also a special sacrifice, and that sacrifice was brought with wheat. And they point out that barley is less expensive. Barley is identified as food, as fodder for animals. Wheat is more human. And the commentaries point out that the journey from Pesach to Shavuot is a journey of becoming more human. More human, because that's really all what we're always trying to do, is we're always trying to become more human, to lean into our capacity as being the great beings that a human being can be. Right? We're born animalistic, but we want to strip that animalistic aspect of ourselves away and become real human beings. Adam Harishon, Adam, right? We know that the name Adam, which is the name for a human being, is Adam. We're all Adam. It's Aleph, the letter Aleph, and the word Dam. Adam, Aleph, Dam. Dam means blood, and Aleph is the oneness of God, like we learned in the Kabbalah of the Hebrew alphabet. So Adam is Aleph Dam, is the godly capacity that takes presence within the very material, very physical aspects that we have within our blood itself. We have godliness pulsing through our blood. So to be human, a human being at his or her full potential is beyond angelic, greater than the angels. So when we say we're becoming more human, we're going from being animalistic to being more human. That is really the greatest journey. is to become more of that, to really experience what it means to be human, to tap into our greatest attributes, to tap into parts of our brain, parts of our mind, parts of our consciousness that really make us the amazing creature that we are. So the Torah says that one should complete this journey, or one should go on this journey by counting. And because of that, this time period is called Sefirat Omer. Now, the word this first word, Sefirat, it has many definitions. The first definition is counting of this, to count. Count numbers is lisaper, is to count. So therefore, we count every single day. Today is day 17. And every single day, we count according to what day it is and according to how many weeks we've already counted. So today is the 17th day of the Omer. We've already counted 2 weeks, and today is, I believe, the third day of that next week. So it's 17 days, which is 2 weeks and 3 days to the. I think I have that right. So we count the days and we count the weeks. But the word sphira, l'saper, also means like a sapphire. It also means to emanate or to shine. So we're not just counting the Omer, but we're also shining through the Omer, which means we're polishing ourselves. We're causing ourselves to shine. We're causing ourselves to emanate. We're unleashing ourselves slowly, slowly through the Omer, more and more and more and more and more until we get to Shavuot. And then finally, the word Sefirat, from a Kabbalistic sense, also from this word sapphire or emanations, are the emanations of God into the world. And in Kabbalah, the word Sefirot, which is a very, very common word, one of the most common and one of the most fundamental words that one needs to know in going on any sort of journey of Kabbalistic study and understanding, one has to know this concept of the Sefirot. And we've taught about it probably a handful of times in all of our learning together, but it's worth it to review it and to focus on it, because these are the weeks that we are supposed to be focusing on it. So without getting into too much detail, because we want to really get an overview of all of the Sefirot and all of the 7 specific ones that we're going to be speaking about, we want to cover it all in one class. In the past, we've done it in several. But let's just get a quick overview of what are the Sefirot and what are the specific Sefirot. So the concept of a Sefira is like this. We've said many, many times that in order for us to exist in our human embodied physical form, we cannot be overwhelmed by the full strength or even the partial strength of godly light. A God, Hashem's light, and again, we're never speaking about Hashem's essence, because we don't talk within Kabbalah, within Judaism, we don't talk about God in his essence, because God in his essence is completely intangible. There are no words that we have to describe God's essence. We only have words to describe that second level, the level of godly light, of godly emanation, and the relationship that we have with this godly light, right? So, just think about it in terms of sun and rays of sun. So if you imagine, if you use that metaphor, so you'd say, so the sun, you would talk about the sun in its essence. God in his essence is not anything that enters into the conversation of studying about God. We don't study about God's essence. We don't have any information or ability to even have any information about that. What we discuss is the rays that come out of that. And even that godly light at its source is too powerful to allow for any other existence, which is why God creating the world wasn't adding anything, it was detracting. The creation of the world was an act of God pulling away, that's called in Kabbalah tzimtzum. God pulling his light back or filtering that light to create a vacant space through which God can now reinsert that light in a smaller dose. So imagine pulling back. There's nothing but godly light. There's nothing but godly emanation. That emanation is too strong to allow anything else to exist. So God pulls back, creates a filter, creates this void, creates this black space, and then slowly allows the light to filter back in, but in smaller doses. And part of allowing this space to exist in a way that it can feel independent is that the light itself needs to be fragmented. It needs to take on its own individual colors. Because by nature, this physical realm, which can only exist as a place of duality, right? It exists almost as a fractured environment. It cannot handle, it can't fully process the oneness of the white light that's at its source. That light needs to be fragmented so it can be properly digested, properly received. And therefore, when God enters, when God puts that light into the world, those emanations into the world, it doesn't just flood in, but it goes through individual channels. It's broken up into different channels that are called Sefirot. And each of these channels bring God's light into this physical realm in a very different way, with a different color, with a different flavor. And it's through all that, through the balance of all of those different ingredients, that now the world is able to function. God is able to run the world and continue to keep the world always moving closer to its godly source, always growing, always feeling God, but yet without overwhelming us too much. To the point where if you would just imagine how, if you put up a blue filter in front of a very strong light, so it shades it and then sort of the light turns blue. So God emanating his light into this world through the different Sefirot now means that there will be balance. We'll experience the totality of that light in its filtered way, but it's going to be experienced in different ways at different times. So what the Sefirot are, they are those emanations, they are those channels, they are those different filters. And that's one of the reasons why, if you've ever seen, even, you've been to Tzfat, so you know that one of the ways that Kabbalah expresses itself, and especially if you go to the artist's quarter, you see this, is it actually expresses itself in colors. Where you might walk into an artist in Tzfat and they might say, oh, the reason that I chose blue here is because blue represents this Sefirah, and red represents this Sefirah, right? So we actually give, there are many different ways that we recognize these Sefirot, and one of those ways is actually colors. So there is a Kabbalistic palette of colors where each color represents a different Sefirah. That's just one way of identifying what the Sefirah is. And there are other ways as well. What we'll do today is we'll talk about the various names of what those Sefirot are and somewhat about how that's felt for us. But those are just many different ways to identify them. They're also often identified by the different archetypes, the biblical personalities that represent them. They're both masculine as well as feminine archetypes that represent the different Sefirot. The feminine ones are a little bit harder because they're not discussed as much within the Sfarim as the male archetypes. So that's why usually when we speak about the Ushpizin, or we speak about these different human beings that embodied certain Sefirot, not to say in a deity type of way, but through their life, they were the channel through which these Sefirot entered into the world. Usually we hear about it more from the perspective of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, and David, King David. we hear about that more. But there were other personalities as well. If you go into as you go through the Torah, many of the books which focus on the Torah from a Kabbalistic perspective, as they go through Torah portion by Torah portion, you'll meet a new character, and then they'll say, oh, this character represents, that Sefirat, and this character represents that. Because it's through their experiences and through the story that the Torah is trying to tell you about them that the Torah is also communicating with you the development of a certain Sefirot, of a certain godly emanation, and how it's taking root in our physical world. Any questions on this so far? All right, and again, if at any point in time, jump in, ask a question. I know this is deep stuff, so do not feel ashamed. Okay, so when it comes to this time period during the year, the reason that we focus on the Sefirot, the reason that we talk about the Sefirot, and the reason that the Sefirot are important right now is because us as human beings, we are modeled, we are formed. The Torah says that man is created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God, right? You've heard this term. There's a verse in the Torah that's not even Kabbalah. There's a verse in the Torah when God creates human being, God says, let's create it in our image. In our image, right? God says that in plural. And who's God talking to? Who's the our? Who's the community over here? So the Kabbalists, there's many different explanations, but the Kabbalists say that actually by that point, God had already sort of mapped out these heavenly realms. He had mapped out the Sefirot and their different levels. So when God says, let's create man, what God was really saying is that all of the heavenly realms, all the spiritual worlds, and all of the Sefirot, they should each contribute something to this human being. So that therefore this human being will take form, even though that will ultimately be a physical form, and the spiritual world is not a physical place. But the physical world, like we've said many times, is just going to be the outermost clothing of the deeper energies that are inside of us, and those energies are all coming, they're all reflecting the heavenly Sefirot. So that man, human being, you and I, we are each a microcosm of that entire spiritual world, where that whole spiritual structure, that whole system, that whole blueprint, every aspect contributed something to this being called Adam, to this being called human. And now we are just these energy beings that reflect God, that reflect the heavenly realms, that reflect the Sefirot, given a physical body where the physical body itself is designed as clothing for the Sefirot. So that every single part, the same way in your actual clothing, your sleeve covers your arm, the main part of it covers your torso, whatever, right? And you see somewhat of the human form through the clothing that the person wears. So too, you decipher the Sefirot, you decipher those inner godly energies through the actual human form of man. Your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your ears. And everything, every single physical attribute that you have exists the way it does. It acts the way it does, and it's located in the area that it's located because it is embodying and it is reflecting one of the Sefirot that corresponds to that physical part and acting in the physical world the way that Sefirah acts in the spiritual world. And that's actually why we are constructed the way we are. We do not have our nose in the middle of our forehead because whatever is being represented by the Sefirah that corresponds to the nose comes in this order. It comes beneath the eyes. It comes sort of kind of, by the ears. But the reason that the ears are specifically meant to be far apart, but the nostrils are together. If you ever take a look at the face, right? The face begins if you look at that, and again, I don't exactly know if everyone's. I haven't done a study on everyone's ears, but I think that you have the ears are the furthest apart, and those probably begin at the highest place of the head. Then you get to the eyes, which are two and farther apart, and then the nose, which are closer together, and then the mouth, which is all one. And that itself represents things that are happening in the spiritual realm about how light that's coming from two different places are now getting closer and closer together, right? Funneling in before they enter into the world. So everything, and again, I don't expect, I don't even fully understand all of the details, or probably not even partially understand the full details of what I just said. But the point, at least, the takeaway is to understand that everything, every aspect of our physical bodies are really representing the spiritual energies that are inside of us. And we detect it, or where we're meant to see that reflection the most, is through our character, through our inner wiring. Our inner wiring of character traits and the way that our character traits begin from really just that place that is beyond our consciousness, that innermost place where we can't even sense it, up until the feelings and the emotions that we experience at every single moment, all of those are also reflecting the Sephiros. They're also reflecting those things. So we love because there is the energy of love in the Sephiros. We get angry because there is that energy. Right? We feel passion. We feel gratitude. All of the emotions that we feel are also somehow or another reflecting this heavenly system of the Sefirot. It's there in the way God runs the world, and because of that, it's there in the way that we interact with other beings. So I'll share my screen with you here. And this is the very famous diagram of the Sefirot. There's 10 of them, and here it begins at the top with Keter, which is crown. This is the divine will. This is the highest upper point. This is where the light is absolutely powerful, absolutely bright, absolutely brilliant. And it descends down to Chachma and Bina. We always find that the Sefirot are located in this chart at either the right side or the left side, or in the center. And the Sefirot that happen on the right side are there more to push the godly energy into the world. They're expansive Sefirot. They shine light. And then the ones on the left typically filter that light. So really, if you were having to put it more linear, it would go like this: Keter down to Chachma, down to Bina, down to Chesed, down to Gvura, down to Tiferet. But in this diagram, we don't look at it like that, because these are really they're partnering together. Just as you need the accelerator, you need the brake. So Chachma cannot exist without Bina. Chesed without Gvura would be a disaster. You need them together. So instead of just making it a linear, just one list of 10, we partner, we group them together, the two traits that are meant to complement each other, the right side being the acceleration and the left side being the brake, or how that is sort of filtered. And then in the center, we get the result of what happens once those two Sefirot partnered with each other. So Chesed combined with Gvura, then you'll get to Tiferet. Netzach combined with Hod, you'll get to Yesod. And finally, Malchut is going to be the destination. But whereas the light began at this overwhelming light of Keter, an unchanneled waterfall of divine will, when it comes to Malchut, it already now has the vessel to receive. So if I decide to pour water because I'm thirsty, and I just pour it, but I don't have a cup, so I have Keter, but I don't have any Malchut. The cup that I pour the water into provides the Malchut for the Keter. So I want the cup of water. It begins in the bottle, that's Keter. It ends up in my glass, that's Malchut. And the entire flow that goes from Keter into Malchut, those are the Spheros that are in between. The process of heavenly flow from the source of Keter goes through all of these stages of Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, and Malchut.
Rabbi, question.
Yes.
Can you just very, very briefly touch what is meant by majesty? That's the only one that
I'm going to go through each one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we'll go through each one. I just want to make sure that there's just a clear understanding just of the overall system, and then we'll go through each one.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
The ones on the left, that's the feminine side, right? And the ones on the right are the masculine side?
In relation to each other.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Correct. So we have also this idea, Kabbalah, which we're not going to touch on too much, but for those that are familiar, so you often have you have a concept in relationships within the spiritual world of things being masculine and feminine. Now, that doesn't mean that we ever label one thing as fully masculine or feminine. It's only masculine or feminine in relationship to what it's partnering with. So Chachma is masculine to Bina, which is the feminine. Chesed versus Gvura, you have masculine and feminine. But that being said, all of these are masculine when it comes to Malchut, which is the feminine of all of these. Malchut itself will become masculine to anything that is below it. So an important thing, and again, this is not part of our series, but I do want to, because we learn together so much, and I hope that you do other reading outside of this, what you'll find also is that this system of Sefirot represents the full structure of all of the spiritual worlds. So that means Keter is the highest place and Malchut is the lowest place. But that being said, you'll also find within the overall breakdown of different filters of different levels of the spiritual world, you might have within. So, for example, you might often see terms in your Kabbalistic study about the spiritual worlds being the 5 spiritual worlds of Adam Kadmon, Atzilut, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. So those are the names of various spiritual worlds. Within those spiritual worlds, there's also a Keter, Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, and Malchus. Right? So therefore, these things aren't absolute. There isn't only one place, one application of this. Very often, these are relationships. So for example, if I told you that within my company, I am the leader. So the leader, that could be the leader. That's a very vague term. I could be the CEO of the entire company. I could be my team leader. It's the same word, but just understanding the specific relationship that I'm speaking about will define, okay, you're the leader of what? I'm the leader of my team, but I am an employee of, my supervisor. So, you would say the leader and the employee in regards to the overall company, the leader is the CEO and everybody else is the employee. But then within certain departments, they also have the system. So this relationship, the Sefirot are a relationship. It's a team of how godly light is manifest. And that means this happens on the broad, this is both the full broad description of how it goes from the tippy top to the very bottom, where Keter is God's will and Malchut is the playing field that we exist on. We exist in Malchut. But that being said, you might also read in your study how there is this same structure, this same evolution of light that's happening within. It's happening many, many times over and over and over again, right? So Keter turns into Malchut in one spiritual world, but then that Malchut becomes the Keter of the world that's beneath it. So the light is being filtered again and again and again and again and again until it finally projects itself into our world. Now, at some point in time, here's what happens. Because of the fact that we are meant to live in a world of free will, at some point, what happens is the godly light, as it's coming down, needs to become vulnerable to some sort of what's called in Kabbalah a klipa. What a klipa is it's a husk. Because godly light, remember that godly light has to power not only the good, but it also, if we're going to live in a world of free will, it also has to power the evil. It also has to power, so to speak, to borrow a term from Star Wars, it also has to power the dark side, right? Because everything needs to exist from God. So that means at some point in the filtration process, the emanations, the Sefirot, need to become vulnerable so that this potential, this possibility for evil can also nourish from its light. That happens only beginning with chesed. So in the top three Sefirot, the Sefirot, which are called mochin. Mochin means they're called intellect. And if you see, they resemble just the language itself, the idea of a crown or being the highest will or wisdom or understanding. These things, the language that we see over here, these being intellectual processes. And one could say, the same way that, you would say, sorry about that, you would say that most of the struggles that we have in our life, most of the struggles that we have are not coming because we don't know better. They're coming because we're not feeling it. Right? I know that I should eat healthier, but when I try to eat healthier, I start having cravings. I start having desires for more sugar. So that's where the war between the intellect that tells me sugar is not healthy and my craving, my desire for sugar, which wants it, that's where free will resides. So free will really cuts off the intellect from the emotions. So therefore, in the Sephiriotic realm, it's a hard word to say, right? There's going to be certain Sefirot that are so high that they're considered part of the divine intellect. And because they're part of the divine intellect, they're not susceptible to any sort of corruption. And therefore, when they reflect themselves in our world, in ourselves, they are also not susceptible to corruption. So therefore, they will always be a part of your thinking process if you could strip down, if you can get away from your cravings. That's one of the reasons why it's always good to make decisions as early on in the day as possible. Because as the day goes on, you get more and more cravings and you get more and more emotional. But in the morning, you're the most in tune. You're the most in tune with your intellect. So there are places even within our mind that are non-corruptible. That's because those places, those intellect reflect the Sephiriotic realm of Keter, Chachma, and Bina, which those themselves, that is godly light, where evil cannot nourish from those Sephiros. They can't get to them. From Chesed downwards, that's where free will begins. Because in the upper realms, that is where the klipa, that is where the husk can begin to nourish from. And that means that in our own inner wiring, that is where struggle will begin. And the same way that in the realm of the Sefirot, everything, the entire perfection of the world, the entire perfection of the coding system is as much, let me share my screen with you again so you'll have it just in front of you, the visualization.